Hi and welcome. I'm State Senator Brian Joyce, and I have the pleasure of representing folks in the Norfolk, Bristol, Plymouth District within the Massachusetts Senate. We've had a fair amount of discussion and news media coverage, and frankly, all of us have learned through our own life experiences that we are indeed in some extraordinarily difficult times. In fact, most economists suggest these are the most challenging times we've faced since the Great Depression. I think by many of the classical definition of an economist, we are indeed in a depression, although we call it now a recession. And I'm happy to have read just a couple of days ago that the economists are suggesting we're coming out of that recession. I'll tell you, that is great news in the abstract, but in reality, there's still an awful lot of people hurting here in Massachusetts. And we've also talked about the challenges facing us in Massachusetts in state government, in local government, and nationally. But in addition to the governmental programs that are more frequently used now as societal assistance or safety nets are in higher demand, we have in recent years a far greater prevalence of NGOs, non-government organizations. And today, as my very special guest, we have a wonderful person, Catherine D'Amato, who is the president of the Greater Boston Food Bank, and I'm delighted to have you here, and we want to spread the word and talk about some of the great things you're doing, and so welcome.
Well, thank you. I hope we can answer your questions and help, most importantly, your constituents understand how they can navigate this very difficult time.
Where are the hungry today, Catherine?
It's a great question. 1 in 8 Americans goes to a pantry, soup kitchen, or shelter. In Massachusetts, it's 1 in 11. So we recently did,
wow.
I know it is a wow.
So tell me, so
It's
one
a
in
wow.
eight, one in eight Americans,
1 in 8 Americans
either goes to a
pantry,
food pantry,
soup kitchen, or shelter in this country. 1 in 11 Massachusetts residents. When you look at who they are, about 60% of them are women, 1/3 are children, 16% are elders. What might also surprise your viewers and constituents.
Mostly women.
Mostly women and mostly children.
Children,
yes.
And some senior citizens.
Right, 16% growing. In the last 4 years, we've seen that number significantly move because the population of our Commonwealth is aging, and their need for certain kinds of services is becoming more complex, whether that's housing or medications or other kinds of public assistance. We're seeing an increase in college-educated individuals seeking food assistance that has very much to do with unemployment, because we are in a very high unemployment rates, which are going to stay with us for a long time. We're seeing 80% of those we serve have a home to go to. It's another sort of common assumption that everyone we serve is homeless, when in fact 80% have a home, 13% of those own their own home. So that's another sort of misnomer. And it works very commonly if you think of an elder who owns the home, can't go buy another home. I mean, you might be able to sell that home for $150,000, but you can't go buy one for that. And therefore, they have a very limited opportunity. And we're seeing the more educated, 1/3 work full-time, another 1/3 work part-time. But the staggering number, equally to the 1 in 8 in the country and 1 in 11 in Massachusetts, is an overall income annually of about $10,000 in terms of who we're serving.
So
that's a shocker.
So 2/3 of the folks who are visiting food pantries are working, either part-time?
Yes, are working. 1/3 full-time, 1/3 part-time, yes. Have a job. But you're talking about a lower wage, and Massachusetts has we have the most progressive minimum wage in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
But perspective, $8 an hour annually, you're gonna make about $16,000 a year.
We have a very high minimum wage, but we also have a very high cost of living.
Oh, absolutely.
So you talk about those seniors, for example, we have an awful lot of folks who are house rich but cash poor.
Exactly.
So they may have a house, here in Milton or in Easton or someplace south of Boston that is worth $400,000 or $500,000, certainly $300,000+, but no money to.
No new revenue coming in.
Right.
So the trade-offs that clients clients make is they're customers of the Greater Boston Food Bank that use, we have a network of 600 organizations from Cape Ann to Cape Cod that provide food to those in need. Common three trade-offs that any individual is going to face, and you've identified one right there: housing. So if I've got to keep my house, I'm going to pay my mortgage first, and then I'm going to go seek food. The utilities, because we are a northeastern state, a cold state, utilities, oil specifically, another trade-off. I have to heat my home. It's a safety issue for my family. Trade that money, take my food money and pay it. And the third trade we see is healthcare and pharmaceuticals. I'm a diabetic, I'm an elder.
Sure.
I need my insulin, and then I'll go to a food pantry. So those trade-offs are common and across the board for the clients that we see coming to food pantries. I only have $1. To your point, I may have my home, but now I've got to go figure out where I get food.
And we do actually in Massachusetts, and it is after all a commonwealth, we do have some of the most generous programs in terms of fuel assistance, in terms of prescription drug assistance. But you know, no matter what you do, there's always a line that's cut off, and there's someone that's just on the wrong side of that line, or they might not be aware of the programs. But and frankly, government, as I started talking about NGOs, government can't be all things to all people anymore.
No, it's a
we have to
partnership.
look to the food bank and to other such organizations.
Well, it is a public-private partnership, and this Commonwealth has some really good examples of that. When you were talking about that elder raise, I think again, it's a very interesting, or any person that has a restricted income, it's not going to grow, whether that's a retirement or a pension, or whether that's Social Security or unemployment, even in these days. That person that's working at minimum wage, $16,000 a year, all the sustainable revenue studies show that in Boston, and I'm not proficient in your district, but in Boston, a family of 3, could be 2 adults and a child, could be 1 adult and 2 children, needs $65,000 to live. So that's a very big difference between my minimum wage job of $16,000 a year to what I need to survive. A family of 4 in poverty is $24,000 a year. So even while that family may be able to take advantage of a public resource like food stamps or women, infants, and children, or a housing subsidy, or an income tax credit, once they step over poverty and make $25,000 a year, they're no longer eligible for those federal entitlements. And that's a lot of what we're also seeing, is that working poor.
Working poor, sure.
That individual who's they're playing by the rules, they're kind of doing the best they can, they're going to work, they're paying their rent, but they're just not able to make it. The dollar is a dollar.
And you mentioned, 2/3, I think you suggested, are women.
That's correct.
And often single parents, I suspect.
There's a high percentage.
And so you may have even a situation where there is some sort of child support payment ordered by the court. In theory, that's terrific, but as a practical matter, if the father is no longer working or no longer, frankly, residing in Massachusetts, it's often very difficult to get that money. So you have a number of women just trying to feed their children.
They are. And we are fortunate that in the Commonwealth, and specifically in your district, you have 8 programs that use the Greater Boston Food Bank to source their food so that they have an adequate, safe, and healthy food supply as individuals go to seek help.
Well, I think this is going to be interesting for people that are watching. No, seriously.
Sure.
Because the person who is using the Greater Boston Food Bank may be either watching us on this program, or it may be their next door neighbor. So let's talk about specifically some of the programs you're involved with within this geographic area.
Sure. Well, from Cape Ann to Cape Cod, we serve 9 counties. So we're a supplier of food to nonprofit corporations, or NGOs, as you noted. So you have to be a pantry, soup kitchen, shelter, a program that is a federally tax-exempt organization recognized by Massachusetts and the federal government to gain access to the food supply at the food bank. You also have to prove you're serving a population of need. So a private school is a nonprofit, but they're not serving a population of need. So you have to do both. So in your district, in terms of your constituents, when I look at, we have 8 programs. So the Braintree Community Food Pantry, Braintree Friends Pantry, the Canton Area Helpline, East Bridgewater Food Pantry, Milton Community Food Pantry, then Emmanuel Pantry, the Bizzle Marks Food Pantry, and the
What communities are those in?
So, well, we've got Braintree, Canton, East Bridgewater, Milton, Randolph, and then 2 in Stoughton, the Marks Food Pantry in the Immaculate Conception Parish. So they run at different times or different hours. Some might be a weekly distribution, some might be a Saturday distribution, or in some cases we are seeing, and we're very much encouraging our member agencies to do that, Saturdays and evenings because of the working poor.
Sure.
And what you'll see on that are the numbers of people that they're serving each month. So if you look at the Immaculate Conception.
So let me just grab a number
Go ahead,
here.
please.
The Milton Food Pantry,
Correct.
right now, on an average month, is serving 863
People.
persons.
That's correct.
That is incredible.
Again, it's
We
shocking.
think of Milton,
It's shocking.
because here's the thing, in the 2000 census,
Mhm.
Milton was the only community in the state that had 3 billionaires.
Interesting.
Um, And I think only 1 remains in town,
I was
but at the same time, we're not, Concord or Wellesley or Dover. I think we were 91st in terms of per capita wealth in that census or around that time. So there are people at all ends of the spectrum. Let's look at Canton. There are 441 individuals being served in the food pantry in Canton.
Right.
In Braintree, between the two, you have 553 persons being served. In Stoughton,
It's big, 2 big numbers.
2 big numbers. We have 1,169 at one food pantry and 586 at another food pantry. Fairly staggering, fairly staggering.
Absolutely, which is why you can then, when you look at those kinds of numbers, you go, okay, the 1 in 11 is not such a stretch.
It's our if it's not you that's watching, it's your neighbor.
Absolutely. The myth about who is hungry is, again, it's not a, and I mean no disrespect, but it's not a bum in an alley with a 4 o'clock shadow who's fighting a chronic disease or an addiction. It's women with children, it's people who own homes, it's elders on fixed incomes, it's people who just because of the spread of cost, as you noted earlier, what it costs here, it's very difficult. Massachusetts saw a 23% increase in hunger in the last 4 years. Nationally, 46% increase.
How do you define hunger?
The not having, it's a food security issue, so not having an adequate food supply to cover your needs or your children's needs. So in Boston, there is a downtown soup kitchen, right downtown. So you often interview individuals, they're like, why are you here? Well, I can eat here, which means I can make sure my kids have dinner. Because if I use the soup kitchen, then I stretch 5 meals out of my family budget to make sure. And we're talking about people that work in downtown Boston, full of suits.
Is there any stigma that are folks self-conscious about going to a food pantry?
Absolutely. I grew up in the food business. I grew up in an Italian family. My grandparents were immigrant farmers. My father was a milkman and a bread man. When I was 8, opened a restaurant. So
This is in San
no,
Francisco?
this is in Northern California.
Northern California,
Yeah, but here's the lesson, Senator. The lesson was at 8 years old, you never, if somebody came to the back door and said, could I wash dishes and pour some food? My father taught us, no, you can't. But you are welcome to come in and sit down and eat. So the irony in my family, there was only 2 groups of people that got free food. They were the poor at the back door and the nun or priest that walked through the front door. So both got free food. An interesting lesson as a child. So the stigma is enormously powerful. Issues around dignity, I can't provide for my family. And we're finding because of it's the unemployed and the working poor, I don't really know where to go. I'm embarrassed to ask. I can't go maybe to my church because Mary and Bob are going to see me. And I can't let them know, or I don't want my kids to see me. There's a lot of issues around that. So this is a very powerful number in your district in terms of the volume of people that just simply need a helping hand. For some, maybe it's once a month. For others, it might be for 6 months while they're out of work, or their ability to retool themselves or get back to school.
And let me just talk a little bit about that, because this has been truly an extraordinary time to be in public office.
I'm sure.
In that previously, I guess we have some preconceived notions, and you suggested, folks still thinking that the person using the food pantry is the wino in the gutter or
Exactly.
something.
That's right.
And it's certainly not the case.
Yeah.
Well, we used to also, I think, suggest that in a better economic time, the folks that weren't working, well, perhaps they weren't productive or they weren't good workers.
Pull yourself up by your bootstrap.
And
Right.
let me tell you, I've spoken with so many people
Yes.
that through no fault of their own whatsoever, and it could be someone that was a classmate of mine who worked 25, 27 years and worked their way up the corporate ladder and was making a very good living at, say, Gillette.
Sure.
And they were in fact an executive and had given their IT for this position. And one day, guess what? Procter & Gamble has purchased the company and your job
The
has gone
position
away.
is gone, exactly.
And you're, 50 years old competing with folks that are 26 that are able to work for a wage that you're simply not able to work for because you have a mortgage and responsibilities. I hear that story and see that
Common
story
thing.
very, very common today. So it's the faces of hunger, the faces of the unemployed, it is all of us. And it's through no fault. It's certainly, could be any one of us, but for the grace of God.
To your point early on in your introduction, this is a recession unprecedented. It has touched everyone, rich or poor. I always think of the rich being less rich in this recession, and the poor still being poor, and in some cases even more so. I've been doing this work for a long time, and similar to you and your commitment to public service. When I think about what do I know about hunger, we can test it, we can talk to people, but it's always economical. Something's happened, I don't have enough money, or I maybe don't have the right education for the money, or I need to go back to school, or something's happened. I, again, mean no disrespect to you in public service, but it's often political. Budgets have to get cut. Politicians have to do their work as
Sure.
well. It has and sometimes an unintentional consequence.
Well, here's
on a group of people.
what happens.
And it's always personal.
Right, and here's what happens on the state level. We're unlike the federal government.
Right.
We have to balance our budget.
Exactly.
And thankfully we do. Thankfully
Yeah.
we do. We're not gonna, I think these children that are being born today inheriting this national debt is sinful. But on the state level, we balance our budget.
Right.
So we saw a $3 billion decline in revenue.
Absolutely.
We went from 21 billion to 18 billion in revenue. So fewer people working, we've
Right.
talked about higher unemployment. That means less income tax, which is our greatest source of state revenue.
Sure.
That means fewer people purchasing goods, which means less sales tax,
Sure.
our second greatest source of revenue. The stock market wasn't performing well, so there were no capital gains tax receipts. So the state,
Massachusetts is very dependent on capital gains.
and so the state has less money, and it's right at the time when there's a greater societal need,
Correct.
when there's a greater demand.
It's an unprecedented
And
connection.
so in steps Greater Boston Food Bank.
Yeah.
So tell me what you do.
Well, what we do is we'll facilitate the acquisition of federal commodities, which right now there's available through our system in terms of various stimulus and various opportunity to try to help states. We handle all the federal commodities. Massachusetts has been extremely generous to our Commonwealth in terms of a state line item called MEFAP, which buys food in our state for people in our state, which is a huge benefit that many, many states don't, and that line's been held, not increased, but held, and that's a win. In my, that's a win.
So you're
For
getting
those
some of the
two.
staples from the federal government, that
And
you
then
think
so-
of the cheese program.
Right, no more cheese
I
anymore,
know,
but
that's-
exactly right, when people will think of butter and cheese, but
Right.
today it's actually chicken and produce and rice and some amazing
So getting some
commodities.
federal
Commodities
food,
coming
and then,
in.
then
We-
the state is spending money to buy
We
goods
purchase-
from state farms and state.
Correct, from growers, which puts the money back in our
Terrific.
economy. And then the biggest group are private donors, so what, like a Stop and Shop, or Shaw's, or AR Food Supply, BJ's Wholesale, Hannaford,
So
Trader
let's give them credit. So
Joe's,
these-
Whole Foods,
all
they're
these
all
companies
donors,
are
all
donors,
donors.
good for them.
And then manufacturers from outside our state also donate. So companies that your constituents would know, like Kraft is a donor, Best Foods is a donor, Number, Stacy's, which is a local company,
It's
is
a
a donor.
Randolph company. like this.
Exactly.
Were they purchased by Pepsi?
But she started local,
Yeah,
right? And those companies donate due to either overproduction, test market, production error, or cosmetic damage. It all comes into our centralized facility in Boston, which we've just built a new 117,000 square foot facility.
Called the
And
Yawkey.
Distribution center, that's very good.
The Yawkey family, for people that don't
Yeah.
recall, we used to own the Boston Red Sox. And when they sold, created this foundation that has just been
It's amazing.
amazing. I'm on the board of another charity called the Yawkey House of Possibilities,
Okay.
a respite home for disabled children and their families in Easton on the campus of Stonehill. And it was the House of Possibilities until we got this incredible support from the Yawkey Foundation. So they're doing some wonderful
They do
things.
some, and they're all about the Yawkey, you know, it's a very unusual name and specific to Boston. When out-of-towners come, they're like, Yawkey, it's like Red Sox, oh, all right, I get it. And all of it comes into this facility, which is a state-of-the-art facility. It can handle just, when I tell you, it's right now we're distributing nearly $50 million worth of food out of the facility to these 600 charities. You begin to see the importance of our work, that we're behind the scenes, making sure we acquire, facilitate all the logistics, material handling, storage, food safety, and then in turn, redistribute that product to 600 nonprofits or NGOs that are on the street, ensuring that this food supply gets out. In your district, you have 8 really important ones that are able to use the food at the food bank. And again, you have to be federally tax exempt and serving the population
Let
needs.
me ask you quickly, one of the
Sure.
programs that I was familiar with through,
Mhm.
you know, I'm a Boston College graduate, and I know there was some involvement at the beginning with this second helping,
Correct.
which was a wonderful idea
Yes.
that some brilliant people came up with, to
Sure.
take restaurant food and other food before it's spoiled
Right.
and redistribute it to the needy. That's your program too, isn't it?
It is. We call that like a perishable food or a food rescue or retail donation program. 20 years ago when that started, it was restaurants and what we call corporate caterers or mass feeders, universities, hospitals, colleges. That has shifted dramatically to the way we think about where we buy our food and where we buy it fresh. Retailers now are the very
Oh,
high
interesting,
volume. If
sure.
you think of you go into your local supermarket, you can get all your prepared foods,
Sure.
you can get the deli, the pizza, the sandwich, the cookie.
And you
the
facilitate getting that stuff. If
So it's moved
people don't wanna
from-
buy day-old stuff and you get it.
Yes,
and
it's
sure.
moved from restaurant, corporate caterer over to retail. So it's a very active program and daily pickups at retailers because you have high volume of fresh. We as consumers have demanded more fresh, more prepared. Here's a staggering statistic. In America, you ready for this? 75% of Americans don't know what they're gonna eat for dinner by 4 o'clock every day. Okay, do you know what you're having tonight for dinner? Or did you give it to somebody else to decide?
I was hoping that my friend Bernie Lynch over there was gonna take me out to dinner, I don't know.
But what
You
I'm
got it,
saying
Brian.
is that we're reliant on our retail, our marketeers, the markets, the
Right.
supermarkets, we can stop. I mean, Boston Chicken was born here.
Right.
That concept of prepared, stop by, get it, go home, feed your kids. So it's 54 cents on every dollar for food is spent outside the home. So those kinds of programs are there, and we're able to capture really high nutrient value product, really good stuff.
We only have a couple of minutes
Sure.
left, so we've established quite clearly the need. 1 in 11 in Massachusetts
Correct.
is utilizing either a shelter or a food
pantry.
food pantry.
That's correct.
So it's your neighbor if you're
Sure,
watching.
exactly. And it could be you.
It could be you. So it's disproportionately women, children, seniors.
Correct.
So, and we've established the great work that you do. I'm sorry, I think we let up too much on the need, and I didn't give you
No,
a chance.
we're there to make sure that people who need food get the food they need. And if your constituents needs any help, by going to the website, if it can be put on your website, they can click on their
We will.
town, they can click
We will.
on whatever M for Milton, and they can see where the programs are in
We
their
will do that.
community.
I have a website, brianajoyce.com, that my son Mike is working on.
Good for
And
Mike.
it's supposed to go live in the next week or so.
Good,
The
good.
one we have, my son Jake developed when he was in high school.
Is it
I've
great?
lost him, he's too
He's off
busy
to
for it.
college.
Mike's, but this website, and I will put a link.
That'd be great.
And you're kind to offer your assistance to
Yes.
people that are watching. What I
Yes.
wanted you to get a chance to suggest how people could help you.
Well, thank you. 3 things make us go: food, money, and their volunteer time. So we have over 14,000 volunteers that come to the Greater Boston Food Bank.
14,000 volunteers.
14,000.
Wow.
2 shifts a day, 6 days a week. So whether it's that high schooler that needs to do his or her community service, or
We have that in many of the local schools.
That's right.
Parents pay attention. Many
That's
of the
right.
local schools now
You-
have a
absolutely.
community service requirement. So you take these
We
children
can
in
take
and
them through, and they sort food, and they bag apples and oranges, and they do a lot of good stuff, and that food gets to those in need. You can always write a check, and even young people can do food drives as well. So there's many ways in which individuals can make a difference in their
so if
community.
they want it, they go to, is it the greaterbostonfoodbank.com or
It's
.org?
gbfb.org.
gbfb.org. Mike, would we be able to get that graphic up on the screen? Terrific. gbfb.org.
Greater Boston Food Bank. There you go.
So,
And we can direct, and especially even if they want to help, they don't quite know how to get to their pantry in their community, or how they can be helpful in their own community, we can help direct them to the organizations that are in your district, serving all of our neighbors,
Sure.
not just your neighbors, but our neighbors.
you know, I love that. I remember a speech on the floor of the Senate one time from Tom Birmingham. We talked about Massachusetts is more than a state, it's a commonwealth. And you know, for the first time in my life, I thought maybe there is a difference between those two terms that are used interchangeably. It is a commonwealth. And for those of us who have food on our table, we should be grateful. And for those of us that have the ability to help some others that might not, here's your opportunity. So Catherine, thank you very much.
Thank you, Senator.
That was
Thank you for
awesome.
what you're doing.
Terrific, and thank you.
Thank you.
So,
Here's where the music plays, and the
I think-
credits are
My
rolling.
gosh, you're good. You're a professional.